For the guy sitting in the jail cell that's saying, what's going on with my life? He could say, pray that prayer, God, open my eyes. He could apply that practice, and I believe God would be faithful to answer in that time. It'd be good for the seeker, somebody who's actively seeking. It's a good practice for the new believer, the seasoned saint, and clearly the pastor. So, what did God show me? Where did he lead me in this passage? What did he bring out of it? These commendations, because that's what they are. He's commending Timothy and Epaphroditus. And you normally find those at the end of the letter. That's why, I said it's out of place. But what jumped out finally as I started listening to the Lord was there's certain qualities that he lists that are worthy of commendation. And just as an example, and commendation it's really an easy way to bridge the gap between their culture and our culture, because the culture of the Philippians was a military culture. It was the Roman Empire, and the town of Philippi, or city of Philippi, was actually a disbanded military outfit that they had overtaken the town, and then it was like their retirement town. So it definitely, the book as a whole, in context of the book, it carries those themes. And even today, I looked up military commendations, and there are a lot. And it only dawned on me yesterday as I had, done all my studying for the scripture, or for the sermon and everything, and it's Veterans Day. And I was like, commendations. So, just to take a break from my talking, I want to take a moment and thank the vets. We have one here with us. Probably, do we have more than one? Who served here? Jake. I told him I was going to pick on him, and he said it was okay. So, he also received the Purple Heart commendation because he was wounded. And that is worthy of honor. And there's other qualities and all these different, I started reading on all these different medals of the Army and the Air Force, and they all got their own kind of medals and their own qualities or of things that you have to meet in order to receive this commendation. And it carries across to the business world as well. People will carry letters of commendation to the next job or to a new company from their old boss. High school students can get letters of commendation from their teachers and their principals that they can present to colleges. So we very much have a culture where this is totally relevant. So the question is, are commendations of value to us? Doesn't everybody desire an attaboy every once in a while? But what's the highest commendation? We're going to take it back from the secular realm to the spiritual realm. What is the highest commendation as believers that we can receive? I believe it's found in the parable in Matthew 25, verses 20 through 26. It's not the whole parable, but it really is about the master, that he had given 3 servants bags of gold with differing amounts, this one is he gave them bags of gold. So after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he settled accounts with them. The man who received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The man with 2 bags of gold also came. "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. I gained 2 more." His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." And the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. "Master," he said, "I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, went out, hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." Master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvested where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money in deposit with the bankers so that I returned. I would have received it back with interest." The commendation that we all desire. When I think about standing before Jesus, the only commendation that matters to me is hearing him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I don't want to hear him say, "I gave you so much. I gave you these talents, these gifts, these abilities. I gave you a voice. I gave you everything you could have asked for, and you squandered it." Because we've all been given gifts. But back to our text in Philippians. What specifically are the qualities of commendation that he lists here? We'll start with Timothy. In verse 20 he says, "I have no one else like him." In the King James it says, "I have no one else who is like-minded." And in the context of the whole chapter, that's a throwback to earlier on where it says, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement with being united with Christ, if any comfort of his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded." So he's using a throwback here, and he's tying it back to what he was just saying. And it's kind of interesting as I continued to meditate on it. Last week we talked about how, we will shine as stars. And here's Paul taking these 2 guys, Timothy and Epaphroditus, and he's saying, here's 2 shining stars. Here's 2 commendations of what I'm talking about. Earlier I said, be like-minded. Timothy, he's like-minded. He has a genuine concern. And what that means, being like-minded, is being of the same soul, of being, cut from the same cloth. Your hearts are just so tight together. And it's closer than brotherhood mindedness. Then he goes on to say, everyone looks out for their own interests, but not those of Jesus Christ. So he kind of uses a negative to highlight the positive. Timothy made his interests what interested Jesus Christ. So that got me asking, are my interests the interests of Jesus? What are the interests of Jesus? What's he interested in? Lord, am I seeking my own interest, or am I seeking yours? It's one of those things where am I following? Am I listening? Am I living in a constant state of submission? Timothy had proved himself already, because as a son with his father, he served with me in the gospel, work of the gospel. So there's that element of sonship. And all of this is kind of a throwback of how Timothy was like a son to Paul. He was like-minded. And Paul, in another passage, says that, do as I do. Follow me as I follow Christ. And then, what did Jesus say? In John chapter 5, Jesus said, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Yes, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. So, on to this story of the cow getting out. Earlier in the week, I didn't listen to God and stay home and rest and not busy myself on my Sabbath. So that was the start. So then later on in the week, I had the opportunity to take a few Mennonites over to Texas Hollow State Game Lands. Hey, they paid me to take them over and I could take my bow with me. It was a win-win. And so I took them over, and I didn't realize the topography over there. But this was Friday, which, if you remember, was 18 degrees. And the wind was about 20 miles an hour. And we're way up on the top of this hill, and I mean, it's steep. So, I get out, and, he goes this way, this one goes that way, and then I go down this way, and we just kind of start wandering down through the woods, and I'm looking down this hill, and I'm like, man, I'm not standing up here on this hill. I'm going to freeze. The wind is just pounding. So I just kept trudging down further and further and further and further, and I'm not thinking about the fact I'm going to have to go back up. But I just kept going down to get out of the wind. But I got down there, and the wind had died. The snow was just kind of coming down, and I found some green grass. And the theme of the Gideon's thing Thursday night was that he leads us into wide open spaces. And it was wide open. And it was beautiful. And I saw this doe 60 yards away, and she just ran. So that was a little disappointing. But I just started walking and praying and just talking with the Lord and just praying about this and that and the other thing. And one of my prayers, and we have all the hunters, we've probably maybe prayed something similar. Lord, you just send a buck along. It doesn't have to be a big racked thing, just a big bodied buck or something, So I'm going along and just had an awesome time in prayer. Just awesome time. It was quiet, peaceful, and I was just spending time with God. And one of the guys met up with me, and then it was time it took an hour and a half to get down to the bottom and across to where I was. It was time to hike back up. Well, I got about halfway up the hill, 3 breaks later, head spinning, I'm dying. And the Lord says, aren't you glad I didn't answer your prayer? So I just started praising him. I did. I said, Lord, thank you for not answering my prayer. Thank you for not giving me what's on my heart, what I wanted, my own interests. Thank you for knowing better and helping me to listen. So it was just this like a child. And, earlier, Mark's daughter was up here in worship, and God just hit me. If only we could all be like her in our approach to God. She was coming up, she's clapping her hands and dancing, and just, there was this abandon of a child, and it struck me. I was like, wow, that's how I want to be with the Lord. Reckless abandon, no fear, not worrying about what anybody else thinks. And it was just, for me, it was a special time this morning, just because it was like, man, God, I want to be as a son to you. I want to learn to walk in your steps. So then Friday night, I went down to Wellspring. They had a conference this weekend, so I went down to visit them, and I've been in contact with Nelson down there, and turns out we have a ton of stuff in common, and it was good to catch up with him and Penn and a bunch of different other people I know from down there. Great conference, but really the crux of it was I felt like the Lord wanted me to go because it's important for me to go and get poured into. So I just went to just be. I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to pray over anyone. And I love doing those things. Don't get me wrong. I love my life, and I love what I'm doing, and I love this congregation. But I could just worship. And I was planning on going out hunting Saturday. Over in El Tay, found a great spot. Found a rack, or what was left of a rack from last year on the ground. It was a nice big 7-point. And I had this nice spot picked out. And it was going to be wind still, and it was going to be cold. It was going to be perfect. And I felt the Lord say, tomorrow needs to be a family day. You're not going hunting. Or I don't want you to go hunting. He didn't tell me I wasn't. Tomorrow needs to be a family day. And you know what? After the rest of the week I'd had, I said, okay, Lord, that's great. So, sure enough, I don't go hunting. And as a son, I followed him. I took a tiny step of, okay, God, I'll follow you. I'll obey you. I'll submit to you. Saturday morning, I woke up to find out that my 1,200-pound Texas Longhorn beef cow was out of the fence and running down the railroad tracks. And where I was going hunting, there's no cell phone service. And I would have been gone. And the neighbor would have come and knocked on the door, and Marge would have been left to deal with a situation that would be impossible for her to deal with. But the Lord knew, and the Lord said, I want you to take a family day and not go hunting. Because he knew what was coming. And my prayer has been, Lord, I want to see you move. I want to hear you speak. I want to be led step by step in even the small, seemingly stupid, insignificant stuff of this life. And he's so faithful. So faithful. And the funny thing, so I get out there and I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? I should have been terrified. I live next to Route 14. And there's a 1,200-pound Texas Longhorn running loose. I should have taken a picture. I could have posted it up there of what she looks like. But I should have been terrified, but I had peace. It was weird. Like it was really kind of uncanny peace. Because I remembered what God had spoken to me the night before, and I was like, here I am. I'm here. I'm not hunting. God, you've got this. You saw this coming. This is going to be all right because you already set things in motion for this whole scenario. So I just started speaking. And you know what happened? The cow crossed over the fence at the end of the property, came down the shooting lane, and she came right to me. She's a little too happy to see me maybe, but I'd like to say that we got her right in, but the fence was frozen into the mud, so it took a little more doing than that. Marge showed great bravery with long sticks and a loud voice and almost got trampled a couple times. But it was an adventure. That's why I said this week was an adventure. But it was God's adventure because he was leading me on these little adventures and exercises in following his voice and seeing how he walks, or seeing how he's moving me. And so that really gave me a picture of as a son. As a son, we listen to the voice of our Father. If we know his voice, we can come running to him. If we mind the things, if our interests are aligned with his, there's a psalm that talks about if you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. And I've heard that twisted to say that God's going to give me a bigger house, a nicer car, a jet ski, a motorcycle, and all these things if I just delight myself in him. That's not what it says. When the Lord is your delight, He's going to give you Himself. And there is nothing better. Nothing in this world. So he goes on, and then he moves on to Epaphroditus. And he says of Epaphroditus that my brother, my co-worker, my fellow soldier. And, you know, it was kind of cool and striking when John was up here this morning. He was talking about, you know, he called me Russ, not pastor. And I'm still at the point where somebody says pastor and I'm looking over my shoulder. I'm getting used to it. But he said something else. Here I am. I have to call my best friend pastor. He'd never said that before. To call somebody your brother, that's a step further yet. When somebody calls you best friend, that's heavy. I don't know about the rest of you, but if I thought of my best friends, I couldn't fill up my hand of best friends that I've had in my entire life, that they're closer than a brother. So for him to say that, He's moving me all over this morning. That's great. I love it. A co-worker. I've done some really hard jobs. I was a commercial roofer, and there's a certain camaraderie that comes from doing hard work together. Mike, you build these huge pole barns, and when you get done, there's a certain camaraderie amongst the crew, isn't there? There's stories about the time the trusses fell, or this or that or the other thing. I don't know if that ever happened, just to clarify. But there's these stories, this camaraderie, this brotherhood of a co-worker. And then there's the fellow soldier. What are the bonds like that you experienced being a soldier with your fellow soldiers? Very close. Probably one of a kind. Yeah. What a commendation that Paul is giving. Oh, that we could all say that of one another. Brother, co-worker, fellow soldier. And that's the thing. We are fellow soldiers because we war not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and rulers in dark places. And you know what? In that battle, there are a lot of people in this room that are casualties. They're wounded. We've fought against the powers of darkness, and we've taken hits. That's worthy of honor. That is commendable. He goes on to talk about how Epaphroditus, one last thing, this character, quality of character that Epaphroditus had, where he was so ill, and in those days he couldn't just go to a doctor. Most of the time you got sick nigh unto death, you died. That's all there was to it. But Paul, whether through supernatural healing or not, rejoices that his sorrow was not multiplied in the loss of Epaphroditus. But all the same, it says that he was willing to sacrifice his very life to take the offering to Paul. We read in 1 Corinthians about the offering from the Macedonians. That's who he's talking about right here. So how do we apply this with one another and to ourselves? How do we go about commending one another? How do we go about cultivating these qualities of commendation in our lives. Hebrews chapter 10. Verses 19 through 25. It says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of the Lamb, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is his body. And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere or a single heart, and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So first of all, we approach the throne of grace with confidence, because Christ has gone before us. And then we draw near. Let him cultivate those things in our lives. We let go of shame with our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience. We've been washed with pure water. Hold unswervingly to the hope that we have. For he who promised is faithful. Be considerate of how we can spur one another on. How can we do that? Seeing things in other people that are commendable. It's not enough to just tell yourself that that's commendable. Tell them. If somebody has grown in relationship with you enough to say, "Hey, you're my best friend," it's okay to say it. And you might even get a tear out of them. And then not giving up the meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. And I've heard this verse used to beat the sheep into being at a church every Sunday and shamed for skipping to go hunting or to do a family thing. I've heard it. It's happened. But you know what? If we get together every Sunday and we don't see each other the rest of the week, I think we might be missing the point. Fellowship with each other every chance you get. Every chance you get. Do life together. It's what it's all about, man. It's what it's all about. Getting together and encouraging one another. And do it even more as the day approaches. So what about those outside the faith? What about the skeptic? What about the seeker? What about the person that's not living for the Lord? Or maybe has no idea what that even means? Can we commend them for good things that we see in their lives? I believe we can, because the Bible says that we were made in his image. The imago Dei. We are image bearers. Every living, breathing human being in the womb, out of the womb, bears the image of the Most High. And as such, they bear qualities worthy of commendation. So as we approach those who are without, outside, Look for the good. Don't shame them and judge them for the bad. But when you see behind all the mud of their life a glimmer, a shine of the image of God within them, call it out. Let them know that they have value.
The key of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. You are good.
You're never gonna let me down. No, you're never gonna let me down. No, you're never gonna let me down. No, you're never gonna let me down. Sing it out. No, you're never gonna let me down. 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 For you are gonna let me down. Declare it this morning. No, you're never gonna let me down. No, you're never gonna let me down. For you are good. Good. Oh, you are good. Good.